And Jason is up there in the icon box. There you go. I like to see you, Jason, but you can remain an icon if you prefer. And so tonight we're building on a conversation that we started last month around wonder and awe. And to some extent, both of these conversations have been about our work and how we do our work with wonder and awe. And so the three folks this evening are all people who do a lot of their research out in the field. And these, they're all going, by my humble mind, fairly far out in the field. And so I think it'll be really great to just kind of travel with them to some extent. So in the order that they are actually going to speak tonight, to start us off with, we have Katina Lilios. And Katina, if you can just, I guess everybody's name is on their thing. We can see who you are. But and Katina is an anthropological archaeologist. And we've had the pleasure of working with Katina over the years at the Obermann Center. She led a summer seminar many years ago, and that a recent book was published out of, I think in the last like 2 years. And so Katina's interest is really concentrated on the histories of the people who lived in Portugal and Spain from the Neolithic through the Bronze Age. So 4000 to 1000 BC. And she'll be sharing her work in that area. And then George Peterson is with us all the way from California. And George is a native, Sioux City, is that right, George?
Sioux City, yeah. Iowa. Yep.
Sioux City, Iowa, okay. And he received his BA in political science from the University of Iowa. And George is now the director of dive programs and the chairperson of the diving control board at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. And he's been a professional diver over 22 years and in the zoo aquarium dive industry for 18 years. So I have been very lucky to get to know George in the last few years and actually get a behind the scenes tour of the Monterey Bay Aquarium with him. And so we're very pleased to have him here. And then we have Cynthia Chow, who is the C. Maxwell and Elizabeth M. Stanley Family Chair of Asian Studies, also in anthropology. And Cynthia and I got talking recently when she was organized a terrific webinar on the pandemic and the effects in Asia. And I was asking about her research, and she has 3 central research areas, one of which is on breast cancer meanings in Asia, another on food identity and social change. And then she said, but my longest research is on the sea nomads of Southeast Asia, at which point I just sort of went crazy and I said, but we must hear about that. And so that's what we're doing tonight. So I've asked all 3 of these people to spend a few minutes telling us about the kinds of places that their research has taken them, and what kinds of conditions are often working in, what they're hoping to find while they're there. And also, and given that this was kind of the inspiration for this series, is perhaps even recalling a moment of particular wonder when they were in the field. So yeah, we're going to start with Katina.
Okay. Well, that's a big question to answer. I've worked almost for 40 years in Portugal and Spain as an archaeologist in very different kinds of conditions. You know, in many ways, many of these situations have involved, yes, you know, excavation work where I dig in caves or dig in, you know, pits in the ground. So sort of the classic image of an archaeologist. I've also done what is known as survey, which means basically walking through a landscape, looking for traces of human activity, which means spending a lot of time looking at your feet and looking at the ground for stone tools, pieces of pottery, anything that shows signs of, again, human activity of the time period that I'm interested in. So this excavation survey. But I also spent a lot of time in museums in Portugal and Spain, all kinds of museums, big national museums and small provincial museums, studying the collections in those museums, which I have to say is some of the most exciting. In some ways, it's almost as exciting as digging, because you often find things in those spaces that have never been published, that you've never seen before. And they can be very exciting sort of kinds of discoveries. Of course, I also spend a lot of time, like doing this on my computer, Googling things and doing that kind of research. But, when I'm in Portugal and Spain, those are the kinds of places where I find myself, doing the research. And in terms of what I'm trying to find, I mean, it really depends on my question, right? Archaeologists never know what they're going to find. So we have to sort of be happy in many ways with whatever we find. And it's our job to try to make sense of it. And I've come across a number of situations where I, carry out an excavation with a very particular question in mind. For example, this burial site that I excavated between about 2008 and 2012, I went in with a certain question, but the site did not produce the material that I wanted. So I had to kind of redirect my question so that it would answer those kinds of questions. My interest was in sort of climate change and the impact of this climate change that took place around 2200 BC on the lives of people at the time. And I was hoping to see sort of people from before the moment of climate change and after the moment of climate change. Problem was, I only found people from before the moment of climate change. So I had to kind of like take a different kind of approach. So that's in general the kinds of places where I do my work.
Great, thank you. George, take
All right, well,
to the ocean.
I'm going to take you to the ocean, all the way from Sioux City, Iowa. I'm sort of the odd fellow here in this panel, as we've got two very distinguished professors and researchers, and then myself. And I'm not a traditional researcher, but my job at the aquarium is I run all of the scuba diving there, and we've got a very healthy dive program, about 50 staff divers and 110 volunteer divers. And our volunteer divers are there largely to keep our exhibits nice and clean and have really cool interactions with our guests from while they're diving. The guests are on the other side of the acrylic, and then also to do presentations and fun things like that. On the staff side of our dive program, we have 50 or so biologists. Many of those are traditional researchers and PhDs, and many of those folks are also what we call aquarists. And these aquarists work out in the field to, and we'll typically do some research, some collections of animals, and then a lot of coral propagation work. And what these folks are trying to do is really garner an understanding of life cycles and animals and what it looks like underwater, so that they can then bring the wonder of that environment to our guests at the aquarium. Well, my job is certainly to partake in all of that research, but it's also to make sure those researchers are safe, effective, and efficient underwater. So while I am not a traditional researcher, I'm certainly engaged actively in the goals of all of those particular projects. I tend to be the project lead out of probably due to the fact that I'm the oldest one now on that whole team, happily. But why do we do field work? As I mentioned, we do a little bit of research and a little bit of coral propagation, but for us, most of the time it's to tell a story of an animal that that's plight may be endangered due to climate change or overfishing, or to tell a story of ocean acidification and how it's affecting corals, and some of the positive things that we can do in the world, like propagate and reproduce, help coral to reproduce. So where do I get to go? Well, gosh, my job is pretty much never the same. And I have been to, I think, 22 or 23 different countries on scuba expeditions to either do exploratory diving, or to collect animals, or just start to understand the ecosystem. Tend to work a lot in Mexico, in Hawaii, Guam, in the Caribbean, and Alaska. So, and no 2 days are the same with my job. It's a fantastic gig, especially for a guy from Sioux City who I didn't even know this existed when I was going to school. So it's been lots of fun.
Before we move to Cynthia, I just wanted to back up for a moment. Katina, are you largely returning to the same places, or are you moving quite a bit?
I'm moving quite a bit. Yeah. I mean, my research seems to change every 6 or 7 years, which, takes me to a different part of the Iberian Peninsula. So I mean, I go back because I like visiting places and the people there, but I don't go back to the same place every year, by no means.
And are you often, at this point, are you usually taking students with you, or is it both? Are you sometimes, and then just in thinking about George, like George's response of, having to look out for the safety,
Oh,
I would think it's a very different experience to go with a group of students as opposed to going more solo.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the last, let's see, again, 12 years or so, I've taken students out a number of years on the excavation. When I do museum studies, that's very solitary work. So nobody's involved with that but myself. So yes, I've taken University of Iowa students, as well as brought in students from other institutions, like the University of Michigan, to work with me. And yes, absolutely. I don't work in particularly dangerous conditions. It's not like George's situation where there's some really, really serious things that could happen. But, just driving to a site and being out in the sun and, dealing with pits, holes in the ground that are often quite deep. I'm I sort of become a super mom in a way. I mean, I am a mom, but I become very careful and cautious about attending to the physical conditions of and the care of my students, and just the emotional conditions. Because of course, most of these students that I take, that I have taken to Portugal and to Spain, have never traveled outside of the country before. So there's a lot of heavy lifting in terms of just priming them and like what it's like to be in this country, and the language and the customs and the physical conditions, the smells, the sounds, the temperature, all these things, are just, for many students, just totally different.
Mm-hmm.
I take them for granted, like many of us who've been in the field, right? We know how to deal, what clothes to wear, et cetera. But, it's really different for our students.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So let's move to Cynthia and hear about your work with the Sea Nomads and where that has taken you, and just the scope of this project.
Well, I'm a cultural anthropologist, and I must say that being as a cultural anthropologist, I've been very much shaped by my background of having been schooled and also having worked in many different parts of the world, even different continents of the world. So I'm originally from Singapore, grew up in the island state of Singapore, and as an English, Malay, Indonesian, and sort of Mandarin speaking person who grew up on that island state, I've been very fortunate to have this early entree into the ethnographic complexities of the maritime world. And then later on, as I began to work as an academic, it's taken me to different countries, such as first of all, England, and then the Netherlands, and then Denmark, and now in America. So it's been all of these sort of fusion of, ideas and fusion of different approaches. So having grown up in the island of Singapore, I have this special affinity, or very close affinity, with oceans and the sea and the water, and I absolutely love it. So my work with the sea nomads began actually in August 1991. So I think by next year, I can say that my work among the sea nomads would have stretched across about 3 decades. And each time I go in, I live with them and participate in all the activities for different periods of time. The first time I went in, I spent 14 months living with them, and then thereafter, I try to go back at least once a year, and each time for either a few weeks or a few days or a few weeks. Of course, now with teaching obligations, I can only go back in the summer to do that. Where has my work on the sea nomads taken me to? Well, in terms of career, it's taken me to, as I said, different continents to work. So, I've been very grateful that they have opened up, the world for me in that way. But as for carrying out fieldwork among the sea nomads itself, then it's in Southeast Asia. And this phenomenon of sea nomadism, I think, is rather particular to Southeast Asia, to the waters of Southeast Asia. First of all, because of the climate, and also because of the richness of the resources that you can find in the waters as well as in the coastal areas of Southeast Asia that makes sea nomadism possible. And in the waters of Southeast Asia, there are actually 3 major groups of sea nomads. And they are culturally and linguistically actually distinct. So one group would be the Moken, and they can be found in the Maguire archipelago, of Burma. And then you have another group, which is the Bajau, which is actually the biggest group. And that you can find, them in the Sulu archipelago of the Philippines, as well as in the waters of Sulawesi. And then the third group are the Orang Sukulau. And that Orang Sukulau, when you translate that, it literally means people of the sea. And it's this third group that I work with. And this third group are mainly found in the Malay Peninsula, especially in the waters of Johor. And historically, they were also found in the waters in Singapore, but the government authorities have moved them out of the waters of Singapore. And most of them are in the Riau archipelago of Indonesia, which is where my work is concentrated in. And in this Riau archipelago of Indonesia, it stretches all the way from the east coast of Sumatra, all the way Straits of Malacca to the South China Sea. And in this area, in this Riau Lingga archipelago, there are at least 2,500 to 3,000 islands. So it's going to be a lifetime of research for me, and of course, studying the sea nomads, it means that I have to move with them. So each year when I go back, I visit old friends in sites that I've covered with, but at the same time, I also travel with them, to go to discover, or rather to get to know other groups, living in different parts of the archipelago. So it's been a very exciting journey. My work really involves sailing with them, living on the boats. And one thing that is not to be mistaken is that even as sea nomads, they do need to come onto land every now and then. One, when the weather is bad, and two, necessarily to get fresh water. And so, we move between coastal areas as well as being on the sea.
Thank you. One note about just how we're running this, because I've seen one person has their hand raised. We're actually going to go through a series of questions that we've all discussed together, and then we'll take Q&A in the chat. So if you, as you have questions, just drop it in there, and then in the latter portion of this, we're excited to get to those. Cynthia, one question, and I'm sorry if this is very naive, but when you return the next year, is it difficult to find them?
Yeah, it is. Well, initially it was very difficult to find them. But having worked with them, they move in a network of places. So you could go back to the same place and you might not see that same person, before, but you know where their network of places are. So you can go to those spots and look up their relatives, and then they will help you to reconnect, with other people. Now, one thing that is also very important, why I move around so much, is that the sea nomads are not a homogeneous group. So even amongst the Orang Sukulau itself, there are many subgroups, and these subgroups are rival groups. Reasons due to historical times up to now. So if I stay forever with one group, then it's not going to create good relations with the other groups, and it would seem that I favor one group. So I try to move around the different groups in order to get to see different perspectives and different understandings of social relations.
Great, thank you. So one thing that's already been touched on a little here, and that we can all also sort of infer, is that this is not physically easy work. I mean, Cynthia, you're talking about, sailing, and George, you clearly have all this equipment, and Katina, there's heat, and also you talked about this, especially with students, some of the emotional work. So it's like your brain needs to be partially on that. And then I would also imagine that you're constantly seeing things that are so just sensory, rich in terms of, the beauty or the strangeness, whatever. How do you balance those aspects of what you're doing out in the field with the need to keep that lens on as the researcher who's, looking for X or Y or Z, and in any order?
I can get started. Well, the good thing is that archaeology works very slowly. I mean, our work is extremely slow. So, and the slower, the better in some ways. So, there have been many times, when I'm digging a site and digging in a pit and I find something, or a student pulls something out of the ground that, is different and special. I mean, maybe this is a good time to talk about that object that Jason, that I took a picture of, that sort of crystal thing, just to give you an idea what I'm talking about. So we found this this object in 2012 at this burial site. So one of the places I've dug is a burial site dated to around 4,000 or so, 4,000 years ago, around 2800 BC. Not those things, the little crystal thing, Jason, the Dolores thing. And so, everybody was working, everybody was quiet. I actually got to dig. I don't always get to dig because there's often not room in the space where we are. But I was able to dig a little bit that day. And, yes, that's it. Great. So, and I felt the sort of, this object, and that, they're all covered in dirt. And I'm like, oh, this is obviously not pottery. And I'm cleaning it. And, as I'm cleaning it, with my saliva, very high tech, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is this clear, stone, a piece of calcite that's clearly been fashioned and placed in this burial. So this was a burial with about 36 individuals, lots of adults, lots of children, adolescents. And this object was found in a corner of one of the pits, along with some other very strange objects, I have to say. And so, you know, obviously the excavation stopped. We all stopped. We all looked. You know, I shared it with everybody, and you know, we relished that moment of, wow, you know, this is an amazing piece. You know, it's not entirely unique in the world of Iberian prehistory. There are other crystalline objects that were buried with the dead. People seem to like special stones, particularly ones that were translucent at this time. So, you know, it was sort of easy to balance the kind of the wonder of this piece and the actual sort of stunning qualities of it. Because if you put it to the light sort of shines through it a little bit. You know, it was easy to kind of sit around afterwards and talk about what it might have been used for. Maybe a shaman, you know, maybe it had some special qualities. It wasn't so difficult to kind of balance the awe and the science, so to speak. It was all kind of wrapped up together. So that's just an example from my work.
Thank you.
You know, what I found really interesting, Katina, you mentioned that you don't get to dig as much anymore on your job. And I kind of have a similar thing, you know, I don't get to dive as much anymore. And, you know, you have to balance that. And I think I find my motivation coming out of seeing my younger Aquarius being able to accomplish that, and the wonder and awe of those folks and what they experience. And I think, you know, my experience has morphed a little bit into that. And I get just as stoked doing something like that now than I used to. That's my proverbial dig, I guess, you know. And thinking about you being out in the field and Cynthia being out on the water with these folks for 14 months. You know, we typically will be out in the field for 30 to 60 days. 60 days is a long trip for us. And when you're scuba diving in the water, it's sensory overload. I mean, and you, as Jennifer alluded to, our equipment is very important. You know, our equipment helps us adapt to a different environment, to the environment of the ocean. But our comfort in that equipment and our comfort in the water has to be second nature. And that takes a lot of practice. So it's almost during that practice, like every time I go scuba diving, I have sensory overload and I experience wonder and awe. Almost every single time I go diving, I see something brand new that I've never seen before. But it takes a lot of practice for us to be able to get to the point where that gear and that comfort in the water and that spatial awareness is second nature. And so my job quite often, kind of like Katina helping her students to dig, is to build up those folks before we get to the field so that their comfort level and their work is second nature, and scuba is the vehicle for them to be able to accomplish whatever the heck it is that they're doing. And then there's just some fantastic, obviously, things to see underwater. So it's thank you. So it's yeah, it's a little bit different, but it's also very similar to an archaeological dig in an academic environment.
George, there's a lot of clicking when you talk, so I don't know if it's something with your headphones but just FYI.
I think Jason said it was my microphone's rubbing on my zipper.
Oh, on your, okay. All right, great, thank you. Cynthia.
Well, yeah, Jason, I'm wondering if you could maybe just show those 3 slides so that I think people will get an idea of, you know, the sea nomads. Is it on?
He'll bring it up. It'll take just a moment to go through all the steps. There we go.
Right. So these are just, you know, 3 images that I've taken during the course of my field work, just to give you an idea of what I mean about, you know, sea nomads, and where their boats function both as their house as well as a living space. And you can see, you know, it's they travel like a whole school of boats. Mother and father could be rowing one boat, and then children, as soon as they are very young children, as soon as they are able to row a boat, they would have their own boat, and then, you know, they would travel in sort of platoon kind of thing. And this is a picture here of a woman and her son in the boat, and they're actually preparing lunch at this point in time. Well, as you can see, it's physically very challenging to do field work in these areas. First of all, you must like being out in the sea, and you must sort of get used to, you know, choppy waters, and you must not be too much afraid if the boat starts to, you know, move around in kind of the waves. And for me, I think it's the physically challenging bit, which is very exciting for me too, because it's so different from, you know, what we are used to. And so it shows me another dimension of the world that I know so little of. And that to me is the awe and the wonder that, my gosh, you know, I know so little about what the world offers in terms of diversity, what the world offers in terms of, you know, the whole array of possibilities. So it's also a very humbling process in this whole thing of the, you know, awe and wonder. And the awe and wonder also comes in the form that, you know, as academics, you're so used to getting a training through formal education, right, in schools, and you read from textbooks and all. But then I come into a maritime world of the sea nomads, where they show me that, you know, their education and their understanding of the world comes through sensory education, you know, not from books and anything. So it just shows us that knowledge can come in so many different forms, and that's where the awe and the wonder is. And their sensory education comes in terms of what they see, what they hear, what they smell, what they feel, in terms of their social relationships with the water world. And so going to the field is absolutely necessary, because you can't capture this on Zoom. You can't capture this, you know, in books, and you really have to be there to see it and to experience this sensory education with them. And then you begin to decode what they understand, the meanings of it, through, you know, their songs, you know, through their rituals, you know, through their everyday practices. And yeah, so every time I think I've given up going in with any set questions. Actually, you know, when I was being trained in PhD, you're told that, you know, you sort of go in with some kind of preconceived structural questions and all. But I think very early on, you know, I realized that if I go in with a set of preconceived questions, it's bringing what I think I know, you know, and trying to put them into a box. So instead, I let the sea nomads lead me and tell me things that maybe I don't even expect to discuss or know. And that's where I think they open up, you know, a world which is unknown to me. And it's just been a fascinating journey. Yeah.
Cynthia, is there a moment that you can recall of just that serendipity, when there was something that you had no idea you were looking for, and maybe it was on a particular trip, a particular moment?
Yeah, well, I think it's the opening up of this word that they use a lot, which is ilmu. And that, again, you know, I started on my research with the Orang Sukulau because I was going to do a PhD thesis, and, you know, and then you're trained in, knowledge of anthropology, knowledge of this and that. And then I go to the field, and then they tell me, they keep using the word ilmu. And I said, what is ilmu? And then to discover that ilmu means knowledge for them, but it means scientific knowledge, divine knowledge, as well as magic knowledge, you see. And I didn't expect to go in to find out that knowledge can mean all these different forms, let alone that, magic forms a really important part of knowledge. So I didn't expect to learn magic, and I didn't expect to learn, magical spells, but then I was initiated into it eventually. And then I thought, oh, I'm going to learn, I'm going to do research on the sea nomads. So when I heard that, okay, I could learn magic spells, I thought I'd like to learn how to cast spells to catch fish. But the sea nomads had other ideas, and they said, wow, at that point, I didn't have a life partner or wasn't seeing anything. So the sea nomads became very, very concerned. To them, getting married is really very important. So they initiated me into love spells. And so, so this whole thing about, knowledge and then getting into love spells. And then my late husband who's very rational as a person. He's very convinced that I must have cast a spell on him. And that's how he got himself into trouble with, being attached to me. So I would say this word ilmu has really been very unexpected, but it's opened up, so much to understanding about how relations are formed through, relationships with different kinds of souls and spirits and things like that.
George, moments of serendipity, surprise in the field.
Well, that's a hard story to top from Cynthia,
yeah.
But I'll set the stage. I'll try to do my best. So right now at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, we're working on opening a new exhibit in 2022. That's going to be, it's called the Deep Experience. And it's essentially what we're trying to do are highlight animals that live in like 400 to 700 feet of water. And off the Kona coast of Hawaii is one of the largest daily migrations of biomass on Earth. And what happens about a mile directly off the coast from the harbor is each night, all of these gelatinous animals, little baby jellyfish, fish, sharks, squid, all these crazy animals that humans have never really seen before, come up from thousands and thousands of feet and hang out between 160 feet of water. And there are some of the most amazing animals that you could ever think of, and some of the most advanced kind of life cycles that you could ever think of in the ocean. And so it happening every night at this vertical migration. And so for the last few years, and Jason, would you mind queuing up the Deep Experience movie if you can do that teaser? For the last few years, we've been working with our staff to get them. Remember, I mentioned we want everybody to be very, very comfortable in the water so that their gear and their environment is second nature, so they can have a hyper focus on the discoveries that they're making. And we've been able to do that. And essentially, I'll just, without muddying the waters here, I'll just show you a quick movie of some of the critters that we have seen that you will soon be able to see on display at our institution.
I love the notion of a vertical migration. Yeah.
And this biomass, as it moves up, I mean, these are microscopic little animals, some of them. So we'll see if we can pull this movie up.
All right, George, is that the Blackwater?
Yeah, that's the Blackwater
Okay.
teaser is what it is called.
We are in lovely Kona on the big island of Hawaii, and we're here. When the sun goes down, all the amazing creatures that live in the deep sea come up at night. So we're going to be part of that tonight. All right, it's time to do this. We're going in. Blackwater diving. I kind of assume I'll be like an astronaut, you know, going into outer space. You're literally dangling from a boat, drifting like plankton in the sea over 4,000 to 5,000 feet of water. There's glittering animals all around you that are translucent until you shine your light on them. All these creatures that I study in the lab and have tried to learn so much about will be right in front of my face, finally. I'm really lucky and honored to be part of the team doing all the research to display animals that no one's ever seen before. The deep sea is the largest environment on planet Earth, and it's the least studied. So I really hope that we can bring them back to the Monterey Bay Aquarium. We can grow them up, we can learn something about their life cycle, and show them to you on exhibit. I want to blow some minds and expand people's consciousness and what's around them on their planet.
So there you go. That's kind of in a nutshell what my job is, to make sure that Mackenzie, who you just saw there, is comfortable, safe, proficient, and efficient in the water so that she can bring you all those amazing critters. And I was standing right behind the cameraman when they were shooting all of that. It just made me proud seeing her accomplish her goals from the lab to the field.
That's just like, I just want to be there. I just want to be jumping into that warm, I'm guessing it's warm water.
Yeah, it's pretty warm water, especially compared to California. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Only not as warm as the water Cynthia's working in. And by the way, I want to go with Cynthia next time.
Very welcome.
So Katina, you shared a story, and I don't know if this was as much about serendipity as maybe more unexpected awe. But if you could just reshare that story in the cave, and then we can move into maybe some questions if people have them to drop into the Q&A.
Sure. So a few years ago, I began a new project, which is basically a big book surveying the archaeology of the Iberian Peninsula. And for that book, I wanted to take photographs, as many photographs of my own as possible. So this sort of gave me license to visit archaeological sites that I've always wanted to visit in Spain and Portugal, but never really had a good reason for, because it was not like closely tied to my research. And as many of you maybe know, Spain and Portugal are sort of famous, particularly Spain, for their cave art. For the caves where, you know, early humans painted on their walls, and these are heavily concentrated in northern Spain, but there are also some in southern Spain. So in 2016, I gathered some of my closest friends, archaeologists from Portugal and Spain. There were about four of us in total, three others. And we made an itinerary and very careful plans to visit some of these caves. And to visit these caves, it's kind of a big deal because most of them are not open to the public. To be allowed to go into these caves, it sort of potentially damages the pigments that the art is painted with. And these sites date to, were painted generally 20,000, 30,000 years ago, some of them quite older, up to 60,000 years ago. So, I've been in caves before, and, I kind of knew what that experience, or I thought I knew what that experience was like. So anyway, we went to a number of these very famous, very special caves. And I mean, if any of you have traveled into some deep, dark caves, I think you know that experience of going down and down and down and down and down. And it's totally dark, totally dark. It's cold. And we were led, of course, by a tour direct. I mean, somebody, who could show us where the art was and could tell us what was going on. Because, I mean, these are massive caves that will go on for a kilometer or two. I mean, you could get totally lost in them. You cannot go by yourself. What I didn't expect was the totally mind-blowing experience of seeing not only these caves, forget about the art. The art was cool, but the caves themselves were these cathedrals. I mean, imagine, the most famous cathedrals you've been to, and just imagine them underground, let's say, maybe a kilometer into the ground, stalactites, stalagmites, your body is, you have to be careful navigating these spaces because there's sort of things coming at you from all sorts of angles, pieces of the cave. And then, of course, there's the art. And, at certain moments in our sort of little path, there are paths through these caves created by the archaeologist to some extent. The tour director, the guide, really it was a guide, would shine the flashlight onto, a little horse or a big horse or deer, in paint or in engravings. And and to know that these were images that were produced by people 20, 30, 40, 50,000 years ago is just is something that I wish everybody could experience. Jason, maybe you can show some of these images, right? So these are some of the kinds of images that you can see. This is obviously a horse, an engraved horse. What you can't tell so easily from the images is the scale. Some of them are very, very small. Some of them are tucked away, in little crevices. Some of them are enormous, looming over your head or along your side or kind of around a corner. There are some red dots. It's a, and when you go down into these caves, it's a little bit of, I think maybe what George experiences, you're down there for maybe an hour or two. So your whole, this is my own excavation. It's not quite in that league. So you can turn this off. Those are the excavations from, here's another cave, Ardales. So you can see that the actual cave itself, the actual stalactites, stalagmites are just mind-blowing in themselves. And you cannot help but imagine that people, early peoples who were down in these caves, imagine them to be kind of life forces, ancestors themselves. Forget about the art and images that, that were placed on them. And my friends and I, who went into these caves, we're all scientists and, know how we're supposed to think about this art. But afterwards, we just, we were kind of, I can't even explain the kinds of conversations we had. It was just a totally transformative experience for all of us. And we did this over about a week or two. We went into different caves and it's nothing like reading them in the books, right? You look in a book and you see pictures of a bowl or something. It's like, oh, that's pretty. That's nice. It's so realistic. It's nothing like being in these caves. The total, embodied experience that it makes you feel like you've kind of entered into a different state of consciousness. This is without drugs, without alcohol. This is, just the pure experience of being in this space and experiencing your body in a very different kind of environment. So that was sort of my, awe-inspiring moment, probably the most awe-inspiring sort of set of experiences I've gone through as an archaeologist. And that was not even directly related to my research. This was just, I need some photos for my book. And in the end, I couldn't even take photos from these caves. I had to, pay somebody else for those photos. But it was really important for me to experience those sites, to kind of be able to write about them in a sort of, I think, meaningful way. And I hope in the book that I've conveyed some of that kind of experiential, embodied experience. It's not just art. It's a total experience to be in these caves.
I could go off, as anybody who's on this talk who knows me, I could go off on the embodiment line for a long time, but we do have some questions in the Q&A, and I do want to give people a chance to ask others. And one of them actually is along these lines. So it's regarding, Cynthia, what you shared about the education of the sea nomads, and wondering if you can give a few examples of what you referred to as sensory education.
Mhm.
And then it was also asked, what languages do they use?
Mhm. Well, okay, I'll start with the language part first, I think, because the other one is going to be a little bit longer in explanation. So I take it that there's a question as to what languages do the sea nomads speak. Well, the Orang Sukulau, quite a good number of them are able to speak Malay or Indonesian, and Malay and Indonesian are, the two languages are rather closely interrelated. So if you know Bahasa Indonesia, then it's pretty easy for you to understand Malay and vice versa. But then depending on which part of the archipelago they are in, okay, they may speak the dialect also of that area that they're in. And then, as I said, that it's not a homogeneous group, right? And they are divided into different subgroups, right? And these different subgroups have their dialects too. So they are actually multilingual because the fish that they catch, right? It's for subsistence, but they also sell it to the Chinese middlemen, who then export these fish, out to places like Singapore or further afield, or like the sea cucumbers that go all the way to China and things like that. These middlemen that they trade the fish with, barter trade the fish with, these are usually Hokkien or Teochew speaking Chinese middlemen. So a lot of sea nomads have picked up Teochew and Hokkien too. And so this is what I mean, that when people say that, they don't have any education, they don't know any languages, that's absolutely not true. I think they know more languages than many of us know it. Now, when I look into the books of history and things like that, this part of the world was also once upon a time a British colony. And from what I read, it looks like historically some of the Orang Sukulau were able to converse in English too, because of their interactions with the British colonialists. So this is in a nutshell, the different kinds of languages that the Orang Sukulau can speak. Yeah. So I had to learn, to speak these languages. So I speak Bahasa Melayu and Bahasa Indonesia. So I don't need translators or interpreters. And I think that's really important so that you can have, direct conversations with them. I can understand a couple of their dialects. I can't quite speak it, but I can understand and comprehend when they are, trying to say something to me. And then I speak Hokkien and Teochew and Mandarin too. So, there are several avenues of language that I can communicate directly with them. Concerning the question about sensory education, wow, that's a really big question. And I don't think I can, go full blast into it or go so very deeply into it, but just a very quick answer. And that is the sensory education comes in terms of learning through seeing, doing, feeling, hearing, and basically education which is transmitted from generation to generation through what they participate and observe in. Let me just give you a few examples. I think, I can give you lots of examples, but just 2 or 3 examples here. For example, they learn how to view the seascape. They learn how to map the seascape. We map it in terms of, political borders and boundaries and things like that. But they map the seascapes through their experience of knowing where would it be a fertile fishing ground to catch shrimp in this season of the year, or where to go, for sea cucumbers. So they're maps as and it's not written down, but it's orally transmitted. So they tell me the narratives, they tell me the stories, and I sail with them, and I map it according to, this is where sea cucumbers are, and that's how I got these maps of the network of different places. Now, one thing that is really amazing is that as I sailed with them, there were places where when we came and they said to me, okay, now we got to be really quiet. You've got to observe complete silence, and you can only look forward ahead. And don't you ever turn back to look behind. And soon I began to understand that this, and they said, and I said, why? And they said, because these were homes of the sea spirits, and these are dangerous, treacherous spots. And soon as I traveled with them and, followed them as they map out the places with these senses, I discovered that these places that they marked out as sea spirits' homes were actually places which had jutting rocks, but sometimes during high tide it gets covered, so you can't see, right? But if you're not careful, if your boat bumps into it, that's the end, of you. So it really made very good sense as to why you have to be really quiet, concentrate on where you're going, why you look forward, don't look backwards, because you really have to know, your way through it. And then, so they learn through, perceiving the seascapes in that way. And then another example is when they're giving birth, they would align so a woman could sort of be lying, flat on her back, on the floor of, the house or of the houseboat or something like that. But when the tides change, even while she is giving birth, they will have to move her to align her with how the tides are going up or down, because you have to be in harmony. This is the social relations of the maritime world and the humans merging in terms of social relations. So there is really, mutual respect for the environment, and the environment and humans are sort of merged into one. So these are just two very brief examples of what I mean by sensory education. And of course, I could go on more, but I think I'll just leave it at these two examples.
Fascinating. So there's one more question here, and I know we're at the end of our time, but I think this is a great final question. And if all three of you could respond somewhat briefly, that would be wonderful. So these sound like such amazing experiences. Thanks for sharing them. What are you all doing to cope with feelings of wanderlust during the pandemic, assuming that you're largely staying at home?
Well, I'll start here. I mean, I have to say I've started to really pay attention to things that are close at home. I find myself noticing things, trees and clouds and landscapes in a way, in Iowa, in a way that I haven't before. And I feel like I'm traveling and seeing things and discovering things that I've never seen before. So that's sort of tamped down a little bit on my wanderlust. I feel like I'm able to wander still safely. It's just at a different scale, right? You can still see things if you just look, right, and observe and pay attention. There's stuff all around us that's amazing, right here in Iowa. So that's how I've adapted.
I like that. I would echo that sentiment. I was going nuts a little bit when the pandemic first hit, and I had a lot of trips planned, and we had a lot of work to do. But I just kind of turned inward. And a wonderful thing about scuba diving in the ocean is COVID-19 doesn't live in salt water. And so I've been spending a heck of a lot of time scuba diving right here on the coast of Monterey. And it's been absolutely eye-opening. For many years I've been diving elsewhere, and I dive here, but not with the sense of wonderment or curiosity that I'm experiencing. So for me, it's kind of been a rebirth a little bit in experiencing the local coast.
Well, I have had to cancel a lot of trips, like, and a lot of plans, like everybody else, because of the pandemic. So I've been pretty miserable about it, but I guess in this period, of having to stay put, it's given me the time and the space to write up on my field notes, which has been wanting for a very long time.
All right. Well, that is at the end of our time. I'm going to just say there was a question that was very specific, and it's from a student, and I'm going to give it to the panelists for whom it goes. And then I've already found the student's UI email. So we'll just put you in touch that way. But otherwise, thank you so much, all three of you. I feel a little transported, and it feels good on this dark November night. So thank you very much. And we'll be getting this recording out somewhat soon. And so you'll all be able to share it, and others of you who are watching can share it as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So George, there's a question